Thank you everyone for coming to our event, Wheels of Change, how the women rode the bicycle to freedom with a few flats along the way. Our presenter is the author of this wonderful book, and she comes all the way from Englewood, New Jersey. And I now present you Sue Macy.
Thank you so much.
This is fine.
It's fitting that I'm here because one of the reasons I wrote the book has a lot to do with Susan B. Anthony, and if you're involved here at all, you know about her quote. Let me tell you what I think of bicycling. I think it has done more to emancipate women than anything else in the world. I stand and rejoice every time I see a woman ride by on a wheel. I don't know if we should shut the front lights off, but
Yeah.
I'm going to be talking about the impact of the bicycle and why I wrote the book, and showing you some images from the book and some that aren't in the book. But one of the main reasons I wrote this book is I've been writing books for mostly for kids for the past 20 years, and early on I came across this quote. And I thought, that's interesting. Why is Susan B. Anthony talking about bicycles? And I often write about sports. And to me, a bicycle is part of sports. And then I came across the fact that Frances Willard, the head of the Women's Christian Temperance Union, and of course the suffragist, wrote a book in the 1890s called A Wheel Within a Wheel, How I Learned to Ride a Bicycle. And when she was 53 years old in England, she learned for 3 months, she studied the bicycle. She learned how to balance, how to ride it, how to take it apart, how to put it together. She mastered the bicycle, and then she wrote this book, which was part philosophy about women's place in the world, and how the bicycle was a wheel that represented the earth that we are, the revolving earth that we're on. And so I knew that these two amazing feminist icons had talked about and focused on the bicycle, and I thought there's got to be a story there. I write books for National Geographic, among other publishers, and I talked to my editor there, and I said, I think there's a book in this, and they said, okay, go ahead. and no one's written about this. There had been papers in journals about Susan B. Anthony, or even Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who also wrote about the bicycle. But nobody had written a book about it. So I was pleasantly surprised that wherever I looked, I found more and more and more. And that turned into Wheels of Change. So I will start by talking about how the bike changed different aspects of women's lives. The bicycle, the one that we know today, which was basically the safety bicycle with two wheels that are equal size, that was introduced in America in the late 1880s. And within a couple of years, it was the fad. It was the #1 fad of the 1890s. And then at the end of the century, the automobile started being made, and all the bicycle repair shops became gas stations, and pretty much the car took over and the bicycle became a child's toy or vehicle. But for the 10 years, lots of amazing things happened. First of all, the way women dressed. This is from the mid-1800s. Women used to wear sometimes 50 or more pounds worth of clothing, including petticoats that went down to the floor, to the ground, and dragged whatever was in the street, like cigarette butts or animal droppings or whatever. It was horrible. Or crinolines, these big structures which made it difficult to fit in a room. With the bicycle, it was impossible to wear that and ride a bike. So there were some solutions. If you look carefully, this woman is riding a side saddle bicycle. Both of the pedals are on the same side, and the wheels are slightly, you can't really see it, but they're not aligned perfectly so that she could balance. This was a prototype. It was never really marketed, but they were trying to figure out how women could find a way to be on a bike, and it was very difficult. This is the bike called the Ordinary, which was the first one to become popular in large numbers before the safety, and it was really hard for a woman in skirts of any sort to ride this because you had to straddle this huge wheel, and that was one solution, but it didn't really work. Another solution was that bloomers, which had been popular among feminists in the 1850s and fallen out of favor, finally, or all of a sudden, started coming back because women realized it would be comfortable and they could straddle the seat and without having their skirts caught up in the wheels and the spokes. There were stories of people who got injured because they're riding along and their skirts flew into the spokes. So bloomers were one solution, but bloomers were seen as an aberration by the fashionable people. I have a quote in the book from, I think it was Harper's Bazaar, about how this was a downfall of fashion for women, and there were some satirical pictures about bloomers. This is actually a cigar box label. In those days, cigar boxes had very elaborate labels. And so this one, you see a cyclist in a shorter skirt, a cyclist, she may have bloomers, and then this person who looks more like a man. And there were editorials written about women wearing bloomers and how that was encroaching on man's sphere. And if women started wearing bloomers, then what would happen next? Then all of the propriety in the social structure would fall to pieces. So there were satirical images of this. In the book, I also quote, there was a school in Long Island, New York, where a couple of teachers had taken to riding their bikes to school, and they weren't wearing bloomers. But the administration was so afraid that they would start wearing bloomers, which would be terrible for the children that they were teaching, that they outlawed women riding, or teachers riding their bikes to school because they were so worried about bloomers. There were alternatives to bloomers. This is from a piece of sheet music, and a scorcher is a person who rides a bike really fast, or that was from among the slang. But she's wearing a skirt with leggings underneath, and the skirt's shorter and the leggings are modest. There were a lot of people who started doing that, and because of the impact of the bicycle, those really heavy skirts with lots of petticoats really never came back. Also the corsets, which were really hard to breathe in, finally saw public opinion going against them because eventually women stopped wearing corsets, but it was really difficult to exercise with a corset on. One of the things I found were these paper doll outfits, which were actually made public by one of the biggest bicycle manufacturers in the United States. And what they did is they got 6 different fashion designers to design what they thought would be the proper bicycle costume. And the green one is bloomers, the other one is a shorter skirt. And you can get these for free if you send 6 2.5-cent stamps to the bike company. They would send you out the paper dolls. Another way that the bicycle changed women's and men's lives is in the way that they socialize with each other. This is a sociable tricycle. Tricycles were interesting because they were also used by delivery people and doctors, because there was a place in the back where the doctor could put his bag, or the delivery people could put deliveries. But as far as a bicycle built for 2, it was a really interesting beginning, this kind of tricycle. But yes,
They both have one.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, they both have. I think they're attached over
I've
here.
seen them, yeah.
Yeah. This is a cigarette, a tobacco card reproduced. It's from the 1930s, but they did this history of the bicycle on this series of cards. But in those days, in the 1890s, when middle class, upper class women would socialize, the gentleman caller would come to the house and they'd sit in the parlor with the parents looking on. So everything was chaperoned. But once women started riding a bicycle, they could go out on their own, meet whoever they wanted. Their parents didn't know anything about who they were meeting. So it led to a lot of independence and kind of a new social order between men and women. I love this picture. It's not in my book, but I just think that it depicts, this new way of meeting people on the road. And this is another piece of sheet music from the time. In those days, playing piano and having everyone sing and listen to songs together was a big way of entertainment at home. And so there were a lot of pieces of sheet music, and they wrote about what was popular. So there were a lot about the bicycle and a lot about women cyclists as well. I'll show you some more later. But this is a love song, and they were published by the newspapers as well as in other ways. This is from the Philadelphia Press. And then, couples would go out on the road for their Sunday rides, and it was an accepted way of socializing. I loved them because they're dressed so nappily. It's a very nice outfits. But at the same time that all this was happening, some people were worried that women were putting themselves in jeopardy by being out on the road. And this is a satirical picture from a newspaper, which sort of, it could represent a lot of different things, but to me it says that these, women might be looking for love on the bicycle trail. At the time, there was a woman named Charlotte Smith who was a feminist, and she was the woman who compiled the first list of women patent holders in the United States. So she did, and she ran an organization for women who worked. But it seemed to her that the bicycle was a threat to women's well-being. She was definitely going against the tide. She started an organization called the Women's Rescue League, and she wrote to ministers and politicians and said, we shouldn't be encouraging women to bicycle. She said, many a girl has come to her ruin through a spin on a country road. And she felt that women were riding the bicycle straight to hell, she said this. And fortunately, and she also had this other little quirk where whenever she saw a man disrespect a woman, she would hit him over the head with her umbrella. And I think she lost 5,000 umbrellas during her lifetime. So she was an interesting character. Fortunately, people didn't subscribe to her reaction to the bicycle. I mean, some people were concerned. The British Journal of Medicine in 1895 had a series of articles about the medical aspects of cycling. And there was an article on women in cycling, and it said, well, of course women should not ride bicycles when they're pregnant or within 3 months after having a baby. And young children shouldn't ride their bikes because they were afraid that by bending over, which is how the racers would ride, their children's spines would be